The rain-slicked highway stretched endlessly before Hank as his 18-wheeler rumbled through the night. He'd been on the road for 9 straight days, delivering freight from Texas up to the Canadian border. Every trip left him bone-tired, but this one had been especially grueling. Sleepless nights in the cab, bad coffee from lonely truck stops, and the kind of roadside diners where the waitresses had smiles as tired as their feet. But tonight, Hank's mood was different. He was heading home, and 2 days earlier than planned. The last delivery had been canceled due to a snowstorm, so he decided to surprise his wife, Laura. He pictured her face when she opened the door and saw him standing there. Maybe they'd order pizza. Maybe just curl up on the couch. After 16 years of marriage, those simple moments meant everything to him. He exited the highway just after midnight, coasting down the familiar streets of their quiet neighborhood. The houses were dark, save for the occasional glow of a TV in a living room window. Their home was at the end of a cul-de-sac, framed by the massive oak tree he'd planted the year they moved in. As he pulled into the driveway, Hank noticed something odd. A car he didn't recognize was parked along the curb, just a few feet from his truck. Sleek black with tinted windows, definitely not a neighbor's. He brushed it off at first. Maybe it was a friend of Laura's. Maybe her sister dropped by. But when he stepped out of the truck and saw the faint light glowing behind their bedroom curtains, his gut twisted. Quietly, he unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was warm, filled with a faint scent. Not Laura's perfume, but something muskier, heavier. He set his bag down without a sound. Years on the road had made him quiet, deliberate in movement. From the living room, he could hear faint noises. Not the TV, not footsteps. Something softer. His pulse hammered in his ears as he took slow, deliberate steps toward the hallway. The carpet muted his footfalls. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. He could see a sliver of light spilling out into the hall, and then a sound he couldn't mistake. A laugh, a low, intimate laugh. Laura's voice, but not the way she spoke to him. Hank's stomach dropped. He pushed the door open, and in that single moment, every mile he'd driven, every night he'd slept alone, every sacrifice he'd made provide for them, came crashing down. Laura was in bed, tangled in the sheets, her hair messy, her skin flushed. And next to her, shirtless, was a man Hank had never seen before. Younger, muscular. His arm was draped lazily around her waist. The smell in the room, sweat, perfume, and betrayal, hit Hank like a punch to the gut. Laura's eyes went wide. "Hank, you're home?" she stammered, scrambling for the blanket. The man sat up, eyes narrowing, but said nothing. Hank didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Inside, something deep and cold was settling. "Yeah," he said, his voice low, almost calm. "I'm home." Laura started to speak, but Hank turned without another word and walked out. He could hear her calling after him, hear the man mutter something under his breath, but it all sounded far away. Hank stepped outside into the cold night air and closed the door behind him. The oak tree loomed above, its bare branches swaying in the wind. In that moment, standing in the dark, Hank made himself a silent promise. He wasn't going to just leave. He wasn't going to just disappear. Laura had destroyed everything they'd built, and Hank was going to make her regret it. I thought that by putting on a new identity, I could simply watch their lives fall apart on their own. But it turned out that destroying them was addictive. It was like a drug. Victor, my new persona, was the perfect bait for their greed and vanity. Status, money, connections, everything they valued above genuine human attachment. When I first appeared in their circle, they had no idea they were looking at the man whose life they once tore to pieces. I started small, showing up at the parties where they loved to shine. Marina, my ex-wife, immediately sized up the new wealthy investor. I saw that same spark in her eyes that once lit up when she met me many years ago. Only now it was colder, more calculated. "Victor, you must join us for dinner." Oleg, my former best friend, who now shamelessly had an affair with my ex, suggested one evening. With pleasure, I replied with a slight smile, hiding the contempt in my eyes. At dinner. I made a point of listening to their conversations, memorizing every weakness. Marina complained that she was bored, that she wanted something more out of life. Oleg boasted about deals that, in reality, were little more than bubbles ready to burst. That evening, I made my first real move. I mentioned a profitable investment opportunity, a project that supposedly brought in steady returns. Of course, it was a trap, and just as I expected, Oleg took the bait instantly. A week later, he was already asking to meet me in private to discuss the details. Victor, I think we could join forces. I have the connections, you have the capital. We could pull off the deal of the century. I barely held back a laugh. Everything was going according to plan, but I wasn't in a hurry. I knew that if I struck too quickly, they might suspect something, so I began weaving the web slowly. I invited them to expensive restaurants, hosted evenings where they saw me surrounded by influential people. All of these influential people were actors I'd hired for obscenely large sums. Marina was giving me more and more looks filled with a mix of interest and desire. She didn't know that I had seen her without the mask, in moments of weakness and betrayal. At some point, I decided to add a little spice. At one party, I accidentally told a story about a woman who left her husband for a richer man, only to end up with nothing. I told it like an amusing anecdote, but I saw Marina go pale. She averted her gaze, but I noticed her heart had started to race. Meanwhile, I began subtly undermining Oleg's reputation. First, light hints in conversations with his acquaintances, that he didn't always keep his word, that he sometimes had problems with commitments. Then leaks of information about his failed projects. I wanted chaos to erupt in their lives, but in such a way that they would have no idea where it came from. The deeper I infiltrated their world, the more they opened up to me. One night, Marina even texted me, "Victor, thank you for listening to me today. I miss sincerity so much." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling two emotions battling inside me, hatred and a strange bitterness. Once upon a time, she wrote such words to me, the real me. I didn't reply. Let her wait. Let her squirm. But the real climax of the second phase of my plan was still ahead. I knew I couldn't just strike at their money or reputation. I had to destroy their trust in each other. And I was going to do it in the dirtiest, yet most spectacular way possible. I had already started laying the groundwork for that blow, knowing full well, after it, there would be no turning back. When I walked out of that bar, the city lights didn't seem as warm as before. They were cold, distant, like stars watching from millions of miles away, silently judging. Every step I took was heavy, but my mind was racing, replaying every moment, every smile, every casual touch between Emma and Daniel that I had ignored. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the way they had both planned it. I could see it now, how Daniel had slowly pushed himself into our lives, helping with the house, giving me business advice, keeping Emma company while I worked late. The little favors I've been so grateful for had been daggers wrapped in kindness. By the time I got home, I knew I couldn't confront them yet. That would be too easy for them. They'd cry, they'd lie, they'd twist the truth until I was painted as a paranoid husband who just couldn't let go. No, they needed to feel what I felt. They needed to watch their world collapse piece by piece. I started with Daniel. His construction company was small but growing, and very dependent on a few key investors. I knew one of them, a guy named Patrick, who owed me a favor. I called him, casual as ever, and hinted that Daniel's financials might not be as clean as they looked. I didn't give details. I didn't have to. Suspicion is a seed that grows on its own. Within a week, I heard Daniel was having funding issues. Investors were pulling back. Contracts were delayed. His confident smile started to fade. Emma, on the other hand, was still glowing, still living in the illusion that her shiny new life was waiting for her. I let her believe it. I let her think she was in control. I even started being nicer to her, cooking her favorite meals, complimenting her more than I had in years. It confused her, and confusion was exactly what I wanted. But the real plan, the real revenge, was something neither of them could see coming. I had a friend in real estate, a quiet, discreet man who specialized in high-end properties. I told him I was looking to invest in a luxury home in the exact neighborhood Emma had been hinting about for months, the one she and Daniel had been secretly browsing online. I made sure word got out that the perfect property, their dream property, had just been bought by an anonymous buyer. A few weeks later, Emma casually mentioned to me over dinner, "Daniel and we found this place we love, but apparently it's already under contract." She looked almost hurt. I smiled, sipped my wine, and said, "That's a shame. Maybe it wasn't meant to be." She didn't know the keys to that house were already in my pocket. I stayed in my car until the sun dipped below the skyline, watching the lights in their apartment flicker on. They were laughing. I could hear it, even through the closed windows and the hum of the city. It made my skin crawl. That sound used to belong to me. I wasn't just going to take her away from him. I was going to make him believe she was his biggest mistake. The next phase of my plan started the very next day. I called in a favor from an old college friend, Mason, who now worked in high-end property management. He was handling a luxury penthouse project in the same building as theirs. I applied for a position as a marketing consultant, but in reality, my only goal was to get building access and stay invisible. Mason had no idea what I was doing. I played it off as me getting back into the corporate scene with the building security pass in hand. I became a ghost. I knew when Lucas left for his gym sessions, when Emily left for her gallery visits, and when they were together. I also learned something crucial. Lucas wasn't as wealthy as he pretended to be. The car, the clothes, the dinners, all financed on credit. He was one bad investment away from collapse. That was my opening. I began small. I made sure some of his investors got anonymous tips about irregularities in his business deals. Nothing outright criminal, just enough to plant doubt. Deals started stalling. Investors pulled back. The smile on his face in the building lobby started looking tighter every week. But Emily, she seemed oblivious. Still living like a queen. Still dressing in brands she couldn't pronounce properly. Still posting fake happy couple moments on her social media. Then I made my move on her. Not as myself, of course. That bridge had burned. But as someone else entirely. I'd already built a new identity online. A quiet, charming art collector named Adrian Cole. Clean record, perfect reputation. Just mysterious enough to intrigue someone like her. I started showing up at the same gallery she frequented, always pretending it was by chance. She noticed me by the third time. By the fifth, she asked my name. From there, it was almost too easy. Emily thrived on attention, especially from someone who seemed even more refined than Lucas. I became her secret escape from her secret escape, the man she saw behind Lucas's back, exactly where I wanted her. By the time I sat down at the grand mahogany desk in my corner office, the storm outside had begun to break. Sunlight cut through the glass walls, bathing the room in a warm, golden hue. It almost felt symbolic, like the universe was finally done watching me burn and decided to let some light in. Natalie sat across from me, flipping through a thick folder of contracts. She had been my silent partner for months, the one person I could trust with the truth. Together, we'd orchestrated every twist, every leak, every perfectly timed betrayal that had dismantled Cassandra's perfect new life. The news channels were still buzzing about the accidental reveal at the charity gala, the moment when Cassandra's wealthy fiancé, Charles Whitmore, had discovered she'd been siphoning funds from his private accounts. I made sure those anonymous documents reached the right journalists. The footage of Charles storming out, leaving her alone under the blinding stage lights, was still trending. "She's finished," Natalie said, closing the folder with a satisfying snap. "Not yet," I replied. "She still has one thing left, her pride." I knew Cassandra. Humiliation wouldn't break her completely. She needed the final cut, the one that went deep enough to leave a scar she'd carry for the rest of her life. So I invited her to my office. When she arrived, she looked nothing like the immaculate woman who used to walk into a room like she owned it. Her hair was messy, makeup smudged, and her designer heels had seen better days. She didn't sit right away, just stood there, arms crossed, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "What do you want from me, Alex?" she snapped. Closure, I said simply. I slid a manila envelope across the desk. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were photographs, her in Charles's penthouse, days after our divorce papers were signed. Screenshots of messages she'd sent to him about how I was dead weight, and too small-minded to ever be successful. She dropped them on the desk like they were poison. "I know what you did," she hissed. "All of it. The leaks, the stories, turning people against me." I leaned back, folded my hands. "No, Cassandra, you did this. I just made sure the world saw it." For a moment, her eyes shimmered, anger, regret, maybe even fear. Then she tried to gather the last scraps of her dignity. "You think you've won?" she said. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "I don't think, Cassandra. I know." I stood, walked around the desk, and handed her one final document. A legally binding notice that the last business asset she tried to cling to was now under my control. Bought legally, through shell companies, all traced back to me. "This was your lifeline," I said. "Now it's mine." She left without another word, heels clicking down the hallway until they faded completely. Natalie stepped into the room after she was gone. "So that's it?" I stared out at the skyline, the city stretching endlessly before me. "That's it. Game over." But as the sunlight spilled further across my desk, I realized something important. This wasn't really about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my place, my self-respect, and my life. Cassandra was just the last obstacle in my way, and now she was gone. I remember how, in that moment, everything around me seemed to slow down. Her face, twisted in fear, her lips whisper my name, and her eyes, no longer holding that familiar air of superiority. She knew. Everything I had been hiding was about to come crashing down on her. "You planned all of this?" Her voice trembled, but still carried a faint hope that I would say no. I simply gave a quiet nod. The courtroom fell silent, like the stillness before an explosion. Journalists, the jury, the audience. Everyone waited for what would come next. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have one more thing." I pulled out a flash drive, the very one I had kept as my final strike. The video began with clips from private parties, lavish villas, champagne, music, half-naked people. At the center was always her, my ex-wife, and the man she had traded me for. Then the footage shifted to covert recordings of her business deals, schemes, money laundering, fake contracts. These materials have been handed over to the FBI. Copies are already with the IRS and 3 major news outlets. I said calmly. She tried to stand, but security gently yet firmly pushed her back into her seat. I watched the confidence in her eyes fade, bit by bit, as she realized there was no way back. When the hearing ended, I stepped outside. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted questions, but all I felt was a cool breeze. Years of humiliation, pain, betrayal. It all ended in that moment. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see them load her into the black van. This wasn't revenge for pleasure's sake. This was liberation. And a month later, while scrolling through the news, I stumbled upon the headline. Former model and businesswoman sentenced to 12 years in prison. I simply closed my laptop and smiled.